The following program is intended for a general audience and may not be suitable for younger children. Parental guidance is advised.
Hi, we're back and we're joined by Professor Ann Lee. Ann Lee's very knowledgeable and writes a column for the Daily Kos, KOS, and I read her column nightly. It's the last thing I do before I go to sleep, Ann, as she talks about the Ukrainian-Russo conflict. And Professor Jonathan Bick, University of Western Connecticut, and can I say poli-sci?
Yes, political
graduate?
science. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And Anne, you have some questions for Konstantin?
Yeah, thanks, and welcome, Konstantin. I hope someday to have breakfast in Tashkent. I'm really looking forward to that someday.
You're very welcome to come and join us. Hey, the breakfast is gonna be on me.
All right, thank you. I had a few questions. It particularly because you've been in the energy industry, been reading about all of the issues with kind of how is Russia is supporting itself throughout the war, because there's a shift in there's capital flight from Russia. Today, I think it was they're putting a 10% tax on any foreign company that leaves. I had some just questions about how they're managing to balance, because you've had some really great podcasts on the problems of the Russian economy. It seems like it's leveling out now that they've gotten China to buy energy. And while I was trying to do some background work, I discovered that there's this Power of Siberia pipeline, and there's going to be a Power of Siberia 2. At some point, and I wonder whether this has allowed for some sort of balance in the conflict. In terms of money flow, because it looks like whatever they lost going to the West is now going to China and India. And so my question is, there's going to be a post-war period, and I'm really curious about how you feel that some of these things are going to get worked out. It seems to me that the sanctions are going to be a key element of this, since they're pretty serious now, and they're going to be probably part of the negotiating process and seizing. And there's been some talk of seizing Russian assets, something like $300 billion American dollars to help Ukraine rebuild. So I was wondering if you had any feelings about how complicated these shifting sands or shifting money flows are going now that we're close to some key point in the conflict.
Where do I start? Let me tell you something. I always give analogy of Titanic. Economy of any large country has inertia. Okay, it does not crash overnight. If it crashes overnight, that's, I don't know, it's asteroid hitting Earth or something like that. But what happened to Russia everyone's saying Russia, what happened to Ukraine? Russia attacked Ukraine, it's waging the war. And there's no question about that. Terrible tragedy is happening in Ukraine, and people are dying. They die every day. But I believe that the future of Ukraine is actually very bright, because what has happened, there are two things. First, Ukrainians have come together as a nation. Now they have a purpose. Now they have a roadmap, and they will rebuild. They have the support of the entire world. So Ukraine will shine. Russia, on the contrary, is going down already, and it'll go down. And you know what? No one is there to help it out, to bail it out. Definitely not China. Titanic hits the iceberg. What happens? commotion, screeching sound, probably shakes. And everyone gets outside, and what do they see? Titanic keeps on going, and the iceberg, passes, and Titanic keeps on going forward. Iceberg is behind somewhere. And everyone's like, oh, great, we survived. But the damage is done. The hole in the hull is there, and the water starts pouring in. But everything seems okay because Titanic has, so much space to be filled with water. It takes time. Nothing happens for 20 minutes. And then the body of ship tilts a little bit, and no one notices, but it tilts. And if there's a ball on a table, on a flat surface, ball would start running, okay? And that's the sign of huge trouble. And then the water starts pouring in more and more, and the tilt is growing, and then all of a sudden, in another 20 minutes, Titanic is going down. And this is, I think, what's happening to Russian economy. Two things did not let Russian economy crash in last year. First, the price of oil skyrocketed. If you remember, right after the conflict, there was a lot of uncertainty, and Russia started raking in money. And that helped a lot. That balanced out everything, like all economical damage that started being done in Russia. And the second thing is Russia had accumulated large cash reserves, some, I think, 11 trillion rubles. And we used to call it the reserves for the Black Day, when the Black Day comes, and the Black Day came. And they have been using up those reserves. So until last year, it appeared as everything was going normal, more or less. Of course, there were numerous signs. The tilt was already seen last year. For example, all Western companies left. I mean, over 1,000 companies like Siemens, General Electric, McDonald's, Apple, IKEA left. It's a huge blow to economy. Hundreds of thousands of jobs lost, disappeared. Okay, all capital, foreign capital, left Russia. Then Russians who had capital inside Russia, they started, moving it out of Russia. Then banks, the financial sector, was in trouble, and still is in trouble. Then they lost all the profits, and right now there's a huge wave, like a tidal wave of loan defaults is coming. Like every month we see loan defaults climbing up. Okay, they're gonna bury Russian commercial banks very soon. And of course, there was a huge blow that Europeans banned European countries to buy Russian oil, and they put a price cap on oil for everyone else, and they stopped buying Russian natural gas. That's 50% of revenue of Russia. I mean, Russia lost it. And so this all adds up, and there's a huge problem. On top of that, all freedoms have been taken, they've stripped away from Russian citizens. Business has been turned onto the war economy rails. Okay, there are new laws that mandate companies how to behave in this situation. Brain drain has been enormous. Some experts say that up to 3 million people left Russia since 24th of February of last year. And you know what? I believe it. I'm seeing tons of people around me, and there are no uneducated manual laborers here. Professors, doctors, engineers, attorneys, you name it, entrepreneurs, big businessmen, factory owners, and that's the Breakfast Club members that just come here. And Russia does not, even if it sells oil to China and India, it does not sell at high price. It trades oil less than $50 per gallon right now. It's pretty close to what it costs Russia to extract and move oil into India and China, because logistics is much more complicated and much more expensive than if they were selling oil to the neighbors, to Europe. So it all adds up. And the thing is, the more time goes by, the bigger the effect is seen. Right now, if you go to a store in Russia, food store, and you would buy, basic groceries, you would pay 50% more than you paid last year, around the time the war started. If you want to buy a foreign car, not such luck. You can only buy Chinese, and Chinese car costs like $10,000 in China. In Russia, they sell it for 35, 40, because they can. There's no competition. Right. Okay, and it's called bailing us out. In Russia, they say, well, China will bail us out. Yeah, China's gonna exploit you until you're dry, and things like that happening. And this is my outlook on what's gonna happen. The more time goes by, the worse it becomes in Russia.
So is this going to help in negotiations, you think, towards peace, the movement towards peace, with these kinds of pressures?
I do not think that Putin and his gang are going to negotiate. Because if, for example, they negotiate, the Ukrainians, they have one demand: get out of our country, and then we'll talk to you. That includes Crimea and Donbass. But if Putin moves out Russian troops, moves them back to Russia, then guess what? Russians will be asking questions. Hey, wait a second. How many hundreds of thousands of people died, and for what? For just coming back? What the heck was that? And we demand answers. So they cannot. So he's stuck between a hammer and a hard place. He simply does not have resources to take Ukraine, and the Ukrainians will be counter-offensive, placing a large counter-offensive now, and then he cannot go back. So he's stuck. That's why he was so hopeful for China. Xi came to Moscow, nothing happened, no deals were made, basically, and that's it. So he will not negotiate. He just cannot afford it.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with you. Actually, I think that there is that's the position that currently exists. John, did you have some questions?
Well, so it sounds like neither side is really going to negotiate. Ukraine is saying you have to leave the country and then we'll discuss terms to end the war. I mean, that's not negotiating. That's saying what they would like to happen, and but he is occupying their country, or at least part of it. So if neither side is going to negotiate, then how do you see this war ending?
There's World War I scenario. If you remember, the Germans and the French, they spent a few years fighting each other. It was a huge front line, like 1,000 kilometers or something like that. And they lost millions of people, but neither party gained anything. So one side would push a couple hundred meters, okay, and then another side would push back, and they were just standing, going back and forth. This is a possibility, at least for some time. The thing is, with every single day, Ukrainian army is getting stronger, and the Russian army is getting weaker. Because Ukrainian army is getting supplies of Western weapons, advanced weapons, and Russia is simply losing weapons. It cannot manufacture ammo and weapons fast enough, so it becomes weaker. Morale is going down, and people get killed, obviously. So at the end, on the front line, I think it's going to be World War I scenario for some time, and then Ukrainians sooner or later will start pushing, unless something else unexpected happens. Okay, but I just don't see anything happening.
Well, I mean, that's something else. So, for example, do you think it's possible that
the nukes?
Well, there's that. There's that. Yeah, that's very problematic, obviously. But also because the U.S. has had a very hostile foreign policy to both Russia and China lately, you think they're being pushed together? And, would China start supplying Russia with weapons and so forth?
This is not in the interest of China whatsoever, because China and the United States, despite having, I can't say it's a conflict, but it's a struggle, in the last couple of years, disagreements. Chinese economy depends on American economy, and the Chinese manufacture and sell mostly to the United States, to Canada, and to Western countries. So China depends on the West. And what I think it will do with Russia, it'll use Russia as a trump card in negotiations. Okay, Xi came to see Putin. They, spoke. Putin probably promised something to Xi in terms of resources of Russia, easy access to Chinese companies. And Xi probably, I don't know, but most likely it's something, we'll give you some weapon things, military things like helmets, perhaps later, sometimes later. But, basically China didn't promise anything to Russia. But the fact that China and Russia met, it means a lot for China. Now it has an upper hand in negotiation with the United States, saying, if you don't do this and this, then, we will help Russia with weapons. So they will use Russia as a card. And, if the United States makes a deal with China, China will just cut off Russia's supply or something like that. So this is what I think. China in this scenario is outsmarting Russia. And Russia has become very dependent on China, because that's the only country that actually speaks to Russia in the world, and that's it.
Oh, that's fascinating. It did seem. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
It did seem like that China's introduction of a 12-point peace plan, which really didn't say much, was an opportunity for them to sort of get their nose in the tent, or their place at the table in terms of exercising leverage. That does seem to be what's happening now, particularly since, as I noted, that there's an increase in all of those just energy flows from Russia to China.
The Chinese 12-point plan is much ado about nothing. That's pretty
Indeed.
much. In Russia, we say we are all for the good against everything evil, something like that, and China is gladly taking Russian oil at cheap price. Okay. Yes. It's taking Russian gas also cheap price. And the rumors have it that Russia actually is receiving less than paying for extracting the natural gas and selling it to China. I'm not sure whether it's true or not, but it's strong rumors. So China is really enjoying the natural resources that Russia is supplying.
I'm under the understanding that products in Moscow and St. Petersburg, like fresh fruits and vegetables, through there, but in the territories, I've heard reports that not so much, that there's rotten vegetables, rotten fruits in the stores. Could you talk a little bit about that? You also had on your podcast shortages at one time.
Currently, there aren't any shortages of food in Russia, because what happens is this not a shortage of anything, pretty much. You want to buy an iPhone, they're available at many places. It's just a question of how much they cost. You used to pay like $1,500 for your iPhone when you were buying from Apple, from official resellers. Now you're probably paying $1,900 because iPhone is brought to Armenia, and then from Armenia it's loaded onto a truck and carried from Armenia through Georgia into Russia. So logistics has become way more complicated, therefore more expensive. So you can buy anything. You can buy a new Mercedes, but you're just going to pay like 3-4 times more than you used to pay for it. How do Russians get electronics, the goods that are not supposed to be sold in Russia? Well, that's very simple. The Russian trading company sets up a subsidiary here in Uzbekistan, buys everything as Uzbek company and ships everything into Russia. So, and you can't do anything about it. It'll be done. So, as for food, fruits, vegetables, meat, Russia is agricultural country. Russia produces enough to feed itself. Perhaps not exotic fruits, but everything else, vegetables. In the USSR, I was growing up as a kid. We didn't have any fruits whatsoever, unless, it was summertime and we actually were picking them from the trees ourselves. And actually we survived, we had plenty of potatoes. It was like a staples. And I'm sure if worst comes to worst in Russia, people will switch to potatoes again, but they will not starve, Currently, there aren't any shortages as I know of. Might be in the future, not likely, but what's going to happen for sure is Russians will be poorer. They will be able to afford much less. And already people start buying less, start, saving money by switching to cheaper foods, trying to cut costs, cut corners. And that will continue a great deal. But, I've seen that before in the late 80s in the USSR, in the early 90s.
John,
Hope I answered your question.
you did. John, you look like you had a question. Am I wrong?
Yes. So I've watched some of your videos. I find them very interesting to get your perspective on history and what's happening in Russia now. One question I had for you was that in one of your videos, you describe sort of the history of Russia from 1990 to today. And you described the period between the year 2000 and 2012 as a sort of a golden age in Russia. And that was during Putin's first 2 terms as president as well. I think Medvedev was also president during that time.
Correct.
For a few years. And what was it in 2012 that changed things? Why you described these protests that were occurring against the Russian government in Russia? What was the cause of that?
Basically, starting around 2002, things started changing in Russia. From 91 to 2002, there was freedom of press, freedom of opinions, freedom of thought, freedom of speech. We were free. We were poor. We struggled economically a great deal, but Russia was a free country. Government played very little role in our lives. Then Putin came and he started empowering the government. His first step was there was a very famous independent TV station, TV channel called NTV. And the first thing Putin did was he basically stole it from the owners. He made the owners the offer that they couldn't refuse. They took some money and they fled Russia. And that independent channel was fantastic channel with independent news. It started belonging to the government. Okay, that was step number 1. And they started step by step, stepping stones. They started getting rid of free media. Okay, taking TV channels, newspapers under government control. It was a long process of quite a few years, but then, Russian government always works stepping stones. It doesn't change things abruptly, like overnight. It introduces small law, then another small law, another small law. In 3 years, you find yourself in a situation where it's like, how did we get here? Well, look, there have been quite a few laws and people didn't say anything, and this is where we are right now. And then pretty much that's what they did. The biggest, like the key point in Russian history was December 2011, when Dmitry Medvedev was the president and he was going to go for the second term. And Vladimir Putin was kind of done at that time. But all of a sudden, Medvedev came out and said, you know what? I endorse Vladimir Putin to come back. And at that point, we all understood that something terrible was about to happen. Okay. And lots of people started protesting. There was infamous protest at Bolotnaya Square. I was there 2011, I think it was 12th of December. Then there was beginning of 2012, Sakharov Square, 200,000 people showed up. I wasn't there, but I was driving by, I saw the huge crowd. And Putin felt like he was giving Russian economic opportunity to enjoy money for the previous 12 years, but the Russians, especially middle class, betrayed him. They started protesting instead of thanking him, saying thank you for all these years of wonderful economic boom and so forth. They went to protest and say, we don't want you. Okay, and then he took it as a personal insult, betrayal. And this is my opinion and the opinion of many other people in Russia. And then he started crushing freedoms of people to make sure that no one has a right to protest anymore. And he started crushing the middle class. Okay, so basically what happened, the boiling point was people were upset he was going for the third term because 2 terms is enough. Hope I answered your question.
Okay, so there was a protest against, it was a political protest against him coming back for a third term after Medvedev.
Yes, there was the catalyst. And the Russian government started striking back against people. You know, there was a huge battle over the next year. There were protests in February, in May, huge protests, and, you know, the likes.
Medvedev, why did he give up going for a second term? Was he strong-armed, or did he see fortune with Putin?
Believe it or not, that he was going to go for the second term. He loved being the president. He prepared his team that he would go for the second term, and he was going to announce. There was a huge, not rally, but there was a huge meeting of the United Russia Party and his team, and he was going to announce. But the rumor has it that night before, Putin spoke to him and something happened. And then, well, I can only guess he was threatened. If he would go for the second term, then something not good would happen to him. But that's my opinion, okay? And then he was offered, probably, if he would give up, he was offered riches. He was given the riches, by the way, you know. And basically everyone wanted him to go in front of this huge audience of a few tens of thousands of people and say, hey, let's go for the second term. And he actually came out. No one knew what he was going to say. He said, I endorse Vladimir Putin. I'm not gonna go for the elections. And I hope that Vladimir Putin wins. And everyone was enraged. His team was enraged. It's a fact, you know, that happened. People were so disappointed, and that sparkled the protests.
Wow. Even as president too, because a lot of his powers, president's powers, were put over to the prime minister's office, who was Mr. Putin, correct?
Oh, yes. The prime minister was Putin at the time. But then there was, we call it Rakirovka in chess when, anyway, he became prime minister, Medvedev became prime minister, and Putin became president. And Medvedev was prime minister for 8 years. He basically didn't do much, you know. He was just, you know, enjoying the ride. Probably, the rumors have it that he drinks a little bit way too much. So,
well,
probably was having a good time.
Judging from some of his tweets and his Telegram messages, something's there with Medvedev. Some of his messages have kind of been off the rail, I would say.
You know what? It's really sad because he was a great guy. He was a good president. He did good policies.
Okay.
He put economy on top. He pushed FSB aside. He stripped quite a few powers from FSB. They couldn't pressure business anymore while he was the president.
Oh, wow.
He did many great things. He forbade Internal Revenue Service to do audits for more than once in 2 years. Before it was like every month they had a right. So he gave business space to operate. The business people loved him, and he was pretty liberal guy. He was pretty good. You know, he went to the United States. He visited Apple's office. He made friends with Steve Jobs. And now sometimes I ask, like, who is this guy? That's not Medvedev that we know. He changed. There's a different guy. You know, it's sad.
Yeah, it is. We got Rick, a question from Rick from the audience is Putin's health. So he's in his 70s, and he, quite bluntly, he asked, will Putin die soon?
Am I the right person to ask that question? I don't know.
All right, let's move on to another one from Nate.
Well, health has been in the talks in Russia, but it's rumors.
It's information, correct?
Right. This is just, we can only guess.
That's right. And then Nate in Wisconsin says, assuming some Russians support Putin, why do they support him? Like, why do the Russian people support? I have my thoughts, but
that's a tough one. Yes, yeah. I've been asking myself this question. There are different explanations. The one I have for myself is most Russians who are traveled, who have been out of Russia, who are educated, who use critical thinking, you know, who use logic and common sense. They do not support, because it's really easy to put 2 and 2 together. But there are some people who have never been out of their village, who have never traveled outside of their town or a city. The only way, they don't speak English or any other languages. They only get news from Russian media. They're used to it, and they've been engineered to support. Okay, they've been brainwashed. Every person who supports the war in Ukraine, the first question I ask, have you ever been to Ukraine? Not one single person who's been to Ukraine would say, yes, I support. It's only people who have never been to Ukraine. Well, why are we in Ukraine? Because there are Nazis and we're, liberating Ukraine. Well, how do you know there are Nazis if you haven't been there? Well, what do you mean? That's a fact. The TV says so, or everyone knows that, things like that. So they're brainwashed.
I hear you. And we got one from Nancy. How am I going to paraphrase this? Would the next leadership necessarily be better if Putin passes away or is removed?
I wish I could answer this question.
No, it's fair.
You see, Russia is at a point where different paths go in different directions, and there is a path that a new leader might come, and he's going to be much better, and he'll bring democracy. He will change Russia around. That's definitely a possibility. How probable is that? I don't know. There's a path that a new leader will come, and he's going to be worse than Putin. That's also a possibility. There's a path where Russia will break up into pieces. How probable, I don't know. But what I personally think will happen, a lot of people in Russia, the so-called elites, basically who are close or are a part of Russian government, very rich people, because they've been enjoying stealing money from the Russian budget, okay, they don't like what's going on. because it affects them personally. They are under sanctions right now. Their assets are sought after in the West. Their yachts are being confiscated, houses seized, mansions and bank accounts. So what I think as a possibility is when Putin is done, I don't think he will, he will be done, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
They will be pointing fingers and saying, hey, wait a second. We didn't know. If we knew, then of course we would be opposing the war in Ukraine. It's Putin's fault. So they will be blaming him, all of them, and trying to put all the blame onto Putin. And they will be trying to make deal with the Western powers, saying, hey, anything, give us back our houses, yachts, money. We'll do anything, and this is actually a good possibility of this happening.
Okay. Well,
all this propaganda people, they're saying right now, and the moment that Putin is not with us any longer, they will change sides. They'll be saying, oh, wow, just like in Germany, a lot of people back in the 1945 said, well, we didn't know about genocide, but it was right in front of your nose. We didn't know. I think this will happen in Russia in one way or another.
So you don't think Putin has a ship going to Venezuela or anything like that? You don't have to answer that. I was just being
No. This is a great question. I actually love answering that. Let's use common sense and logic. Okay, Putin is God in Russia.
Yes.
He has a private army that just is responsible for his own personal safety. Okay, no one can get close to him. If he flies somewhere, airport is blocked off, everyone's kicked out. So he's in complete safety here in Russia. There in Russia. Now, let's suppose he flies to Venezuela. He has a nice palace there. He brings all his bodyguards, let's say 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
He brings all the money. He brings 2 planes of gold. He brings his wife, children, whatever. He settles. And what will Maduro do next? What do you think?
I think he's got him.
Maduro will fly to the United States and will say, hey, I have Putin for you.
Yes.
Will you forgive me for my sins? Will you give me a nice place in California, where I can live for the rest of my life? And, some money, like $15 million or something like that. Or just keep my money from Venezuela. But you can have Putin. And, the Americans will probably say, yeah, we'd love to. They'll say, Maduro is a good guy. Yes, he sinned, but you know what? He deserves to be forgiven. Okay. And then, boom, they have Putin. And now Putin has a warrant under his arrest. Where would he go? To the United States? No, he would fly right straight to Hague. So I think he's not stupid to fly anywhere out of Russia. He's stuck in Russia, and the only way he gets out of Russia, dead. Okay, so he can set up this operation in Venezuela, in North Korea, in Africa, country, anywhere. Yeah. But why would he do that? If I were him, that'd be the last thing I would do, because once he would fly all the bodyguards, what are they going to do? Thousands of them. What are they going to do against Venezuelan army?
That's true.
Okay, nothing. They will be given ultimatum. Hey, give up, or we will destroy you in 15 minutes. And they'll say, hey, goodbye, Mr. Putin, So, out of question.
If he did go to Venezuela, would he bring his ex-wife as well? Sorry.
We should ask his ex-wife,
That's right.
That's not logic and common sense. That's sort of, that's a marital situation is involved, personal thing.
100%. Professor John, do you have any final questions or final thoughts before we wrap it up?
Well, I am a bit alarmed if the only conclusion to the war in Ukraine is a World War I style situation or a nuclear exchange. I hope that the countries will work for a solution other than those two, because those sound pretty cataclysmic. or potentially so anyway.
Your words to God's ear. Say that. What about you, Professor Ann Lee? Do you have any final thoughts or questions?
Oh, I just want to thank Konstantin for his thoughts on these matters. It helped me frame my own ideas, especially what I like is your podcast always sort of talking between the lines, and I hope to link to your podcast more often now on my webpage as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
All right. And Konstantin, before we go, do you have a message for our audience at all?
Well, I have a message that I keep
Yes.
on repeating.
Every day at what time?
No, I have two messages.
Okay.
The first message, if any Ukrainians watching us or listening up to us, I would like to say, please forgive us. And the second message is, Carthago delenda est.
My Latin is rusty.
The Carthage must be destroyed.
Hannibal.
Well, Google this phrase, Carthago delenda est, and you will understand the meaning.
That is a very good phrase. Can you hang on a minute while I close out the show, my friend?
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Konstantin and Professor Ann and Professor John for joining us on this episode of North of 48. I found it fascinating. Konstantin, I'm hoping maybe in the future we can have some time and talk some more. It is good to get the inside Russia scoop from the most unusual Russian, as he calls himself, and I really appreciate it. So take care.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.